As President Barack Obama pushes Israel to make tough choices for peace, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushes back. In a White House meeting this week, both men seemed unable to iron out their differences. The April deadline for a framework agreement between Israel and the Palestinians is looming. Is there any chance of making this deadline? Find out next on The Line. This is On the Line, and I'm Aisha Tanzim. President Obama met Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House this week. A day before the meeting, in an interview with Bloomberg News, he insisted that Israel had to make hard choices. He also warned of international fallout if the peace process failed. In return, Prime Minister Netanyahu told the U.S. president that he would never compromise on Israel's security. To explain to us what this means for the peace process, we have two guests with us. Michael Wilner is the Washington bureau chief for the Jerusalem Post, and Hussein Ibish is a senior fellow for the American Task Force on Palestine. He's joining us via Skype. Welcome to On the Line. Mr. Wilner, you covered the meeting this week very closely. I want to ask you, when President Obama says Israel has to make tough choices, what exactly is he talking about?
Yeah, and I was in the Oval Office for the meeting. When President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry say that Israel has to make tough choices, what they're saying is if this process fails, and as you mentioned, there's a 9-month time frame for negotiations that's set to expire next month, if that process fails, there are forces that don't believe in Israel's right to exist that will be emboldened if the process falls through.
Mr. Ibish, President Obama also talks about international fallout. What exactly is he referring to?
Well, I think the most obvious manifestation of that is the change in policy of the EU and now Germany, which is pushing to extend the new EU policy to both bilateral relations with Israel and not just the public sphere, but also private sphere financing as well. And what the EU has done multilaterally, and the Germans are starting to do in Europe, and I think much of the rest of Europe would follow if they succeed, is basically to say to Israel, listen, we cooperate with you in your internationally recognized borders. We recognize you. We recognize the legitimacy of your state, but not the legitimacy of your settlement activities. So anything that has to do with settlement activities beyond the borders of 1967, we will not fund, we will not cooperate with, and we will not have anything to do with it. Now, I would suspect that if the United States were strongly opposed to these European measures, the Europeans would not be doing it. And I think that's the kind of thing that President Obama is referring to when he told Jeffrey Goldberg that if the peace talks fail, that the United States may find it difficult to manage the international fallout.
Mr. Wilner, I want to, since you were in the Oval Office, I wanted to ask you what you saw. What was in the body language of both leaders?
Right. Well, what was particularly interesting was how Secretary Kerry was standing in the back watching President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and particularly closely to see exactly what they would say. And what the Prime Minister said seemed to have taken him a bit off guard. And what he said was, we will agree to a peace accord with Palestine that ensures the security of Israel, which he said multiple times. But he also said that we're looking for a real peace. We're not looking for a piece of paper. In an allusion to the framework agreement that Secretary Kerry has been pushing very hard.
Okay, let me ask you more. President Obama and Bibi Netanyahu's relationship is always criticized. It seems to have tension. Has it improved over the years as you've watched it, or has it gotten worse?
It's interesting because when President Obama first took office in 2009, he still had gray hair. He just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And
you mean he still had black hair? He has gray hair now.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
That's right. And he decided to reinvigorate the peace process after multiple years of a hiatus. It was very ambitious, and you'll recall there was a famous photo of him with the Jordanian king, with at the time Egyptian President Mubarak, and with the two leaders, and their efforts largely failed, in part because the administration had this laser focus on settlements that really irked Netanyahu, and that has come to define their relationship. It has not improved.
It has
since.
not gotten better. Let me ask you, Mr. Ibish.
Yes.
The April deadline for a framework agreement. Do you think it's still doable?
No, I don't think so. And by the way, I'm not sure what we're talking about is an agreement at all. It may be guidelines, it may be principles. It may not be anything that the sides have to actually agree to, let alone sign. I think it may be something they just have to not say no to. And there may be reservations, published or indeed unpublished, which is a very interesting new idea that it seems more and more intriguing to me the more I think about it. At first, I kind of recoiled, but I start to see the potential value in it now. I think it's very ambitious still. One more thing, that reference to paper, by the way, might also harken back to a comment that irked the White House a great deal by Defense Minister Ya'alon when he said that General Allen's security plan, which is the Obama administration's security proposal, wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. There was a number of very disparaging remarks he made in a short period of time about Secretary Kerry, about Mr. Allen and his plan and his proposals, etc. So that there may have been a hint of that there as well.
Okay, let me ask you, since Mr. Ibish mentioned the security plan, U.S. has promised Israel security. In fact, Secretary Kerry said that to AIPAC in his speech this week, that U.S. will guarantee Israel's security if Israel makes the choices for peace. What do you think of, what exactly is U.S. Promising Israel?
Well, in truth, you say that Secretary Kerry promises to ensure Israel's security if they make peace. In reality, they promise to ensure Israel's security regardless of whether or not they make peace. And that's a commitment that was on full display this week at the American Israel Public Affairs Committee Annual Policy Conference, AIPAC. Congress has committed to Israel's qualitative military edge over its neighbors multiple times. And But indeed, what Kerry was referring to was the plan that was just mentioned, General Allen's plan to ensure that borders under an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement are secure. And ultimately, the fear is that Israel would lose its strategic depth. It would be less than a mile wide at certain parts if they cut this deal.
So let's talk about this piece of paper because we move forward, Mr. Ibish. What do you think of this idea that U.S. will be able to provide Israel security? What are Israel's concerns for this?
Well, I mean, I think that Israel does have long-term security concerns, mostly about unconventional forces rather than conventional forces. Israel has, it is an open secret and has been for a long time, a nuclear deterrent. And therefore it is virtually immune from conventional attack by another state. And there's no real prospect of that, even in a chaotic Middle East. So Israel's security concerns really have to do with asymmetrical warfare and non-state actors, and best exemplified by kind of rockets that have been fired in the general direction of Israel, sometimes to deadly effect, most often to, harmlessly, out of Gaza, and occasionally from Sinai and other places. So that sort of, I think, is the front end. The second part of it, I think, is the notion of security cooperation. Now, if there's to be a Palestinian state, which there must be, I think that the Israeli-Palestinian security cooperation that's been established since the tenure of former Prime Minister Fayyad began, and it's continuing, but it's fraying a little bit right now, was an essential component of laying the groundwork for Palestinian independence. Security, from a Palestinian point of view, is also, it's a sine qua non of governance. You can't have a functioning society, you can't attract investment, and you can't have law and order and a basic decent society. So in this sense, there is a convergence between Israeli interests and Palestinian interests. I think that some of the Israeli demands, about early warning stations and things like that, are completely reasonable in terms of a two-state agreement. Some of them, including a very long-term military presence in the Jordan Valley, are not. So there are ways of bringing the international community, Jordan and other states into the mix to ensure that indeed Israel and Israelis have the security that they deserve.
So that's going to be almost, so that's all going to be a part of a long-term solution. I know, Mr. Wilner, you want to add something here.
Right.
Yes, but we need to take a short break. We'll be right back and continue from right here.
Voice of America. 1,500 hours
of news and information.
Educational and cultural programming.
To more than 134 million people
worldwide each week.
Listen to us on radio.
Watch us on television.
Follow us on Facebook or Twitter.
And through your mobile device.
VOA.
We're dynamic
and consistent
in bringing you
the most reliable information in 43 languages.
Tune in.
Tune in.
Welcome back to On the Line. I'm Aisha Tanzim. We are talking about the possibility of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Our guests are Michael Wilner, the Washington Bureau Chief for the Jerusalem Post, and Hussein Ibish, a senior fellow at the American Task Force on Palestine. Mr. Wilner, you wanted to add something about Israel's security concerns.
Right, and Hussein mentioned the rocket fire that comes from the Gaza Strip and characterized it in terms of
how deadly it is.
Right,
yeah.
as being harmless. And I just wanted to...
No, I say sometimes.
Right. I just wanted to add the fact that they're not harmless because they're intended to be harmless, nor
right.
Nor is the effect of terrorizing a large portion of the Israeli public, not noteworthy.
In fact, that's the Iron Dome.
Let me say I agree. I agree with that. And I think that they have been entirely detrimental to the Palestinian cause, as well as a serious security concern to the Israelis. There are also, though, Palestinian security concerns. And I think everyone should read the report issued by Amnesty International about the unlawful, and they claim willful and unnecessary killing of Palestinians by Israeli occupation forces in the West Bank. So the Palestinians, too, have security concerns that are very real. And I think both peoples need a conflict-ending agreement to give them an assurance that they're going to stop trying to kill each other. And I think that's just absolutely one of the most fundamental aspects to all of this.
And in fact, one of the reasons why these rocket attacks are harmless sometimes is because of the Iron Dome system that's Israel's installed with the U.S. help, which is what we were talking about, the missile defense.
Right.
Mr. Wilner, let me ask you, when Bibi Netanyahu says, we've done our part, the Palestinians haven't, what is he talking about? What is it that Palestinians promised to do and they did not do?
Right. Well, Netanyahu characterizes a lot of the talk on the Palestinian side as "quote unquote" incessant incitement to violence and undermining the peace talks. What he says is that the Palestinian leadership is not adequately preparing the Palestinian people for the eventual sacrifices that they're going to have to make should a peace accord actually come to pass. And in part, that's because of the weakness of the Palestinian leadership. The question is who exactly Mahmoud Abbas represents. And Netanyahu fully recognizes that. But for instance, Saeb Erekat has said that Netanyahu wants to reinvade Gaza, assassinate Abbas. These are unhelpful things. The State Department has come out forcefully condemning those comments and has said that they undermine the peace talks.
So
Well,
tough choices on both sides, Mr. Ibish. Is it one of the...
Absolutely.
Yeah, let me ask you if this is one of the tough choices that the Palestinians have to make, which is prepare their population for friendly relationships in future with Israel. And what other tough choices are there that Palestinians haven't made so far?
Well, I think that both parties have to do that. And I think that while I agree that those were unhelpful comments, the number of senior officials in this current Israeli government who are actually openly against a two-state solution, who say they don't want a reasonable peace agreement with the Palestinians. Mr. Bennett is only one of them, or who say it's impossible and have given up completely, is very great. And you know, we could talk about Mr. Ya'alon's comments that implied that Secretary Kerry was messianic, and therefore, I think to most normal people that means deranged, or many other unhelpful comments. There are a lot of people making unhelpful comments here, and there should be, in my view, individual consequences for that, for specific people who do say things that are so unhelpful. What Palestinians need to do is to prepare their public, above all, for a major compromise on refugees. They must understand that Israel is not going to agree to the right of return of millions of refugees that will alter the demographic structure of the Israeli state. They just won't do it. This is a consensus across the board in Israel with almost no exceptions, very few exceptions. I think the Israelis have to prepare their public and also some of themselves, you know, even the leaders, that they have to make a serious compromise on Jerusalem. The Palestinians are not going to accept an agreement in which East Jerusalem doesn't serve as the Palestinian capital. That doesn't mean necessarily redividing Jerusalem. It doesn't mean that's all East Jerusalem is going to be, but it means that the Palestinian capital has to be in East Jerusalem. So the idea of total uninterrupted and complete Israeli sovereignty over all of Jerusalem, particularly the Holy Basin and the holy sites there, is also a non-starter. And so I think that there's been quite a good deal on both sides of passing around the hashish on the right of return and on Jerusalem. And I think both the Palestinians and the Israelis need to really start preparing their people that, look, we're going to have to swallow a bitter pill on refugee rights on the one hand and on Jerusalem on the other hand, and there's no other way to get to a deal.
Okay, Mr. Wiltner, A, do you agree? And B, I want to ask you about settlements, which have been basically one of the reasons why the peace talks have been stalled, or at least what the Palestinians claim. Why is there so much settlement activity? In fact, an Israeli government report said that activity doubled last year. Why? What is the Israeli government trying to achieve here?
Well, first of all, I agree in part with what was just said in terms of readying for some major sacrifices, certainly Jerusalem, on the part of the Israeli side. In terms of some members of the Israeli government, look, Israel is a democracy. It actually is a representative democracy. It has a wide range of opinions. Bennett is one member of that government, and he has voiced that opinion very loud and clear, no doubt. In terms of settlement policy, just at AIPAC, I was just there this morning, and people were talking about how the lessons of pulling out of Gaza in 2004, 2005 still impact the peace process today. And the lessons that they take from that are that you see, Israeli families being pulled out of their homes by Israeli troops, and Gaza was a fraction of the number of settlements that are now in the West Bank, and the result was a tremendous influx of weapons, rockets that we were just discussing.
But is there?
Can I answer that? Wait, no. There's a very important point to be made to that, which is that they're drawing the wrong lesson. what they're forgetting is that, like Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon in 2000, similar to its invasion of Lebanon in 82, at the unilateral redeployment in Gaza under Sharon was unilateral. All these things were unilateral. So there was nobody on the other side who had a stake in making it work. And I think the lesson you have to learn from all of this is unilateralism does not work. Unilateral measures will not. Whereas, but compare it.
Mr. Emir,
hold on.
Let me just jump in here because
compare it to the peace treaties. They work.
Yes, I got to a point because Secretary Kerry said something about this. Do you think they're partners? As you said, Israel is a representative democracy. There are all kinds of opinions there. Do you think there are people in Israeli politics who understand that Gaza was a unilateral decision and may have been different had there been a partner on the other side?
Yes, I certainly. I particularly.
Hold on, Mr. Ibish. I just want Mr. Wilner to answer it, and then I'll come back to you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate point. At the same time, Israel is certainly searching for members on the other side to negotiate with. The fact that Hamas doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist, of course, is a problem. I think everyone in Israel
But do they
agrees to that.
recognize Mahmoud Abbas as a legitimate partner?
Sure, but Mahmoud Abbas hasn't stepped foot in Gaza since 2007. So if he's going to represent the Palestinian people, is he only going to represent the people in the West Bank? Is that going to be a separate state? Are the people in Gaza going to vote on a referendum? Are they? Where's Hamas going to fall down on this?
And then
Okay, some of those questions are reasonable ones, but the first two are easily answered. Even Hamas recognizes that the PLO is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. There is no document in English, in Arabic, or in the UN, or among Palestinians, or anywhere that says anything different. So the legal authority of Abbas as chairman of the PLO to conduct negotiations with Israel is not really under question.
That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our guests, Michael Wilner, the Washington Bureau Chief for the Jerusalem Post, and Hussein Ibish, a senior fellow at the American Task Force on Palestine. And thank you for joining us. Please send us your questions or comments, or watch our past shows on our website, voanews.com/ontheline. We look forward to hearing from you and hope you'll join us again next week for another episode of On the Line.
I'm Peggy Chang, host of Cultural Odyssey. This is VOA.
The thing that strikes me as a father of a young child is what a natural scientist she is. And the real reason for that is her curiosity. Pure curiosity. And when you look at the best scientists around, what you find is that's the one thing they share. They're deeply curious about something. I'm Tim White. I'm a professor of integrative biology and director of the Human Evolution Research Center here at the University of California at Berkeley. These are my desks, because I got two. When I was a little boy, I went to the LA County Museum, and they had these display cases, I'll never forget, where you walk along the display case, and it was just tooth after tooth, one after another of this, and I thought, wow, what I wouldn't do for just one of those teeth. This is human heritage. It's a way to get at reality, this fossil record, without having to resort to science fiction. Some 4.4 million years ago, a creature who walked on two legs, we found over 100 pieces of her skeleton. Not really an ape, not a human. That's why we gave it a new name, Ardipithecus ramidus. And we have been studying this creature ever since we first encountered it back in 1992. It's a 4.4 million year old fossil, and so we're getting pretty close to that split point between ourselves and chimpanzees. People still get really interested in where they came from. It's genealogy writ large. The notion that, you know, we're walking out across the desert and then oh, what's that that bumped my foot, you know? And then you pick, oh, it's a skull. Well, by gosh, you know? And that's not the way it works. We spend a lot of time identifying where to go. And what makes the Rift Valley countries so productive is that you have these geological forces that are actually pulling the crust apart. And due to the fact the Earth is continuing to pull apart, these rocks pop back up to the surface. Of course, that's what makes us go back. It's like some bizarre form of gambling, I suppose. You know, you never know what was hidden the last time you were on an outcrop. This is the first rib of Artie. This is a replica. We've extracted it now, but these bones were so fragile, they're like chalk. And so we made a pedestal by digging carefully around them with dental tools, and then we popped those out and transported them to this laboratory in Addis Ababa, where we sat with the fossil under a binocular microscope for hours on end to slowly take each little grain of matrix away until you end up with the bone. And at the same time, you know, you got a lot of focus on the hominid, but we had 6,500 vertebrate fossils. Parrots, peacocks, shrews. We can put the organism in its ecological and evolutionary context. And that's a much bigger enterprise to pull that together. So when we eventually published, it was something like 47 authors. I was asked at AAA, asked, you know, could I have prepared it faster? Sure. I could have turned a garden hose on it, you know, and I'd have had the teeth, and then I'd have been able to publish those really quickly. Snakeskins. Oh, the snakeskins. Those are puff adders, some of the most dangerous snakes in the world, certainly in Africa. And I got those in the late 70s when we were excavating a site called Laitoli in Tanzania. And one of the little-known things about these creatures is that you can chop them into segments and then put them on bamboo skewers with tomatoes and onions, and then you just shish kebab. And it's a very nice addition to the normal camp fare. So we had a few puff adders at Laitoli. The study of human origins has been controversial since before it was even a study of human origins. Darwin comes up with this idea that humans are linked to the rest of life, right? And how do the cartoonists characterize Darwin? 1871, that's an original print. Look what they do to Darwin. They put his head on the body of a chimpanzee. Why do they do that? To make the point of how absurd this idea is that we evolved from a chimpanzee. Well, Darwin got that. Darwin never said we evolved from a chimpanzee. Darwin said it would be a mistake to project any living organism back as what our ancestor was like. Instead, we need to find it through the fossil record. This is the earliest Homo sapiens. So, you know, you've come a long way from 4.4 million years ago with Artie up to, this is about 100.
The African continent holds some of the world's most magnificent wildlife. But a struggle for survival continues. The booming ivory market supports poachers and traffickers. The wildlife defenders' message is strong.
If in fact you're doing this, we will catch you.
Thirst for ivory. Coming up next.